Have you ever looked at an old map and wondered about the names of places that no longer exist? One of the most captivating of these lost names is Tartaria. For centuries, this word appeared on European maps, denoting a huge, sprawling region in Asia. The mystery of Tartaria is what draws so many people to its story. It represents the unknown, a blank space on the map that early cartographers filled with speculation and legend. We will look at the historical records, the maps, and the writings that mention this enigmatic land to understand the reality behind the myth. Understanding Tartaria is important because it teaches us about the nature of history itself and that our understanding of the world is always evolving. The story of Tartaria begins on paper, specifically on maps created by European cartographers from the late Middle Ages onwards. Before modern imaging, map-making was an art. Cartographers relied on travelers' accounts to sketch the world. Tartaria was a placeholder for a poorly understood part of the globe. The name comes from the Tartars, a term for Mongol and Turkic peoples. The association with the Mongol hordes gave the name a sinister undertone. Some writers linked Tartar to Tartarus, a version of hell. As knowledge improved, the depiction of Tartaria changed. Cartographers divided the territory into regions like Chinese, independent, and Russian Tartary. The term persisted into the 19th century, a cartographic ghost from an earlier era. This helped solidify the idea of a distinct land called Tartaria, laying the foundation for later myths. The story of Tartaria appears in the writings of early European travelers and historians. In the medieval and early modern periods, accounts of Asia were a mixture of observation, rumor, and fantasy. Writers described Tartaria as a land of extremes, immense wealth and great hardship, populated by fierce warriors, but also possessing magnificent cities. One of the most persistent legends associated with Tartaria was the idea of a great hidden city or a powerful, centralized empire. At its height, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire in history. The term Tartaria became a vessel for these memories, transforming the diverse peoples of Central Asia and Siberia into the subjects of a single mythical Tartarian empire. This transformation was fueled by a lack of direct knowledge. The mystery of Tartaria was a screen onto which Europeans could project their own fantasies. The term was an external label, an invention of European geography. The transition of Tartaria from an archaic geographical term to a central element of modern alternative history is a fascinating story. As the name disappeared from official maps, it became appealing to theorists. The seeds of the modern myth were sown in esoteric writings, popularizing the notion that mainstream history was incomplete. The full-blown Tartarian Empire conspiracy theory is a recent internet phenomenon. Proponents collect old maps and architectural drawings as evidence. This myth reimagines Tartaria as a global civilization with advanced technologies. According to the theory, this world was destroyed by a mud flood engineered by global elites who rewrote history. This unsupported narrative has captured imaginations, offering an explanation for the modern world's complexities. To understand Tartaria, we travel back to the late Middle Ages, when European maps looked very different. Cartography blended science, art, and folklore. Map makers in Venice and Genoa sought information about the world, but reliable sources were scarce. Their knowledge of Asia was hazy, pieced together from ancient texts and merchant reports. This vast land needed a name, and Tartaria first appeared. It wasn't a self-identified empire, but a European way to categorize the unknown, a label for territories from the Black Sea to the Pacific. Home to diverse peoples, it was simpler for Europeans to group them under one heading. Tartaria was shorthand for lands of the Tartars, a name Europeans applied to Mongol and Turkic peoples. The name became known after the Mongol invasions, creating an image of fierce horsemen. Thus, the land became Tartaria, a European invention, not a political reality. It reflected European knowledge, a placeholder for a poorly understood part of the world. This naming was the first step in Tartaria's journey from a label to a myth. For medieval Europeans, Tartaria was drenched in fear and mythology, largely due to a linguistic coincidence. The name of the Tartars sounded like Tartarus, the deepest pit of hell. Medieval scholars saw the Mongol armies as divine punishment, a hellish horde. The chronicler Matthew Paris wrote that the Tartars were devils from Tartarus. Tartaria was imagined as a sinister place bordering the realms of darkness. Attributing a demonic origin to the Tartars was a means of coping with the trauma. This perception ensured Tartaria would remain a subject of intense dread for centuries. As the centuries progressed from the Middle Ages into the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery, European knowledge of the world expanded dramatically. This was reflected in the increasing detail and accuracy of their maps. The depiction of Tartaria underwent a significant evolution during this period, transforming from a monolithic, undefined blob into a more complex and subdivided territory. Cartographers began to receive more information from merchants traveling the Silk Road, from diplomats sent to the east, and crucially, from the eastward expansion of the Russian state, which brought it into direct contact with the peoples of Siberia and Central Asia. This new information allowed mapmakers to start breaking down the vast expanse of Tartaria. On maps from the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, we begin to see a more nuanced picture. The single label of Tartaria is often replaced with more specific regional identifiers. Russian Tartary or Muscovite Tartary appeared in the north, denoting the vast Siberian territories that were gradually being conquered and incorporated into the growing Russian Empire. This part of the map became progressively clearer as Russian explorers and colonists pushed further east, establishing forts and trading posts and charting the great rivers of Siberia. Further south, the maps often showed independent Tartary. This term was generally used to describe the Khanates of Central Asia, such as Bukhara and Khiva, in the region once known as Transoxiana. These were powerful Islamic states that remained for a time outside the direct control of the major neighboring empires like Russia, China, or Persia. To the east, cartographers delineated Chinese Tartary, a region that encompassed areas like Manchuria, Mongolia, and what is now Xinjiang. This label acknowledged the significant political and cultural influence that the Chinese Empire, particularly under the Manchu-led Qing dynasty, exerted over these territories and their nomadic inhabitants. This process of subdividing Tartaria demonstrates a growing, though still imperfect, European understanding of the complex political realities of Asia. The old single name was no longer sufficient to describe what was clearly a diverse and fragmented continent. However, the continued use of the overarching term Tartaria, often as Great Tartary, shows how deeply ingrained the concept had become in the European geographical imagination. It lingered as a kind of supercategory, a reminder of an older worldview, even as the details on the map became more precise. This cartographic persistence helped to cement the idea that Tartaria was, or had once been, a single coherent entity. Beyond the lines and labels on maps, the idea of Tartaria was also shaped by the written word. The accounts of the few Europeans who ventured into these lands provided the flesh for the skeleton of cartography. These travelers' tales were, honestly, a potent mix of careful observation, cultural misunderstanding, rumor, and outright fantasy. They were immensely popular in Europe, offering a thrilling window into a world that seemed utterly alien. The stories of Franciscan friars like Giovanni da Pian del Carpin and William of Rubruck, who traveled to the Mongol court in the 13th century, were among the earliest and most influential of these accounts. These early narratives painted a picture of a harsh and demanding land, but also of a highly organized and disciplined society under the rule of the Great Khan. They described the Mongols' nomadic lifestyle, their military prowess, and their complex system of governance, which included a remarkable degree of religious tolerance. They marveled at the capital city, Karakorum, a cosmopolitan hub where people from all over the Eurasian continent gathered. These accounts, while dispelling some of the more demonic myths, replaced them with a new image, that of a powerful, centralized, and sophisticated empire, albeit one with customs that Europeans found strange and sometimes shocking. Later travelers, such as the famous Venetian merchant Marco Polo, added even more color and detail to this picture. Polo's descriptions of the court of Kublai Khan in China, which he also considered part of the Tartar dominion, were filled with tales of immense wealth, grand palaces, and cities of incredible size. While many of his contemporaries dismissed his stories as wild exaggerations, his book, The Travels of Marco Polo, became a cornerstone of European knowledge about Asia for centuries. His accounts helped to solidify the idea that a vast and powerful Tartar empire existed, ruled from a center of unimaginable splendor and controlling immense resources. It is crucial to recognize that these accounts were always filtered through a European lens. The writers were products of their time and culture, and their interpretations of what they saw were shaped by their own preconceptions and beliefs. They often struggled to understand the complex social structures and political systems they encountered, sometimes simplifying them into a model of a unified empire that was easier for a European audience to grasp. These written texts, combined with the maps, created a powerful feedback loop. The maps provided the geographical frame for Tartaria, while the travelers' tales filled that frame with compelling, if not always accurate, stories of a great and mysterious civilization. When we ask, where was Tartaria, we are chasing a phantom. Tartaria was wherever European cartographers decided to write the name. It was not a fixed country with defined borders. Instead, its boundaries were fluid, shrinking and shifting as European knowledge of Asia grew. Tartaria was an immense territory, stretching across northern and central Asia to the Pacific Ocean. It covered the Eurasian steppe, Central Asian deserts, and Siberian forests. This vast region was a mosaic of different environments and peoples. For centuries, it remained a terra incognita, an unknown land, allowing Tartaria to become a canvas for the European imagination. Locating Tartaria is about understanding a geographical concept, a label born of ignorance. Legends of Tartaria often include a magnificent city, a grand capital of power, wealth, and knowledge hidden in the Asian interior. This captivated Europeans, fueling dreams of discovery. The legend likely stems from Karakorum, the Mongol Empire's capital. As the empire declined and Karakorum was destroyed, its memory transformed into a semi-mythical place. Storytellers imagined its grandeur, depicting it as a new Camelot with ancient wisdom and treasures. This mythical city became a focal point for the idea of a sophisticated Tartarian civilization. Modern alternative history has taken this to extremes, imagining a technologically advanced global civilization. This serves as a symbol of a lost golden age, hidden from us. While baseless, it speaks to a desire for simple answers to complex historical questions. The geography of what Europeans called Tartaria was defined by the open steppe and the vibrant oasis city. This contrast is key to understanding life in Central Asia and Siberia. The dominant way of life for many peoples, like the Mongols and Kazakhs, was pastoral nomadism. This nomadic world was punctuated by pockets of settled urban life. Along the Silk Road, great cities flourished. Places like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Khiva were sophisticated centers of trade and Islamic culture. The relationship between the steppe and the city was complex and often fraught with conflict. This reality is a world away from the myth of a single, monolithic Tartarian civilization. To dismantle the myth of a unified Tartarian empire, we must look at the diversity of peoples who lived in the territories labeled as Tartaria on old maps. The term was a European invention that papered over a complex human tapestry. Independent Tartary's population was a mix of Turkic-speaking nomadic peoples and Persian-speaking sedentary populations. Chinese Tartary was home to Mongols and Manchus, who conquered China and established the Qing dynasty. To the west were the Uyghurs. Russian Tartary, or Siberia, was home to dozens of indigenous peoples. To label all these diverse peoples as Tartarians is a profound historical error that erases their unique identities. Understanding this diversity is crucial in seeing Tartaria as a flawed European concept that obscured a far more interesting human reality. Separating fact from cartographic fiction requires us to act like historical detectives. The name Tartaria appeared on European maps for over 500 years. The fiction lies in the interpretation of what this name signified. The myth imagines it as a unified, advanced empire. The reality is that it was a geographical label of convenience, a term used by outsiders to denote a vast region that they did not fully comprehend. These subdivisions represent the gradual increase in European geographical knowledge. We must also critically examine the architectural evidence presented for a global Tartarian civilization. Grand, neoclassical and Baroque buildings exist in many parts of the world. The fiction is that they were all built by a single lost civilization. As European colonial empires expanded, they exported these styles across the globe. Ultimately, differentiating fact from fiction requires us to trust the consensus of professional historians. They have found no evidence for a lost Tartarian empire. The story of Tartaria is a powerful lesson in historical literacy. The transformation of Tartaria from a forgotten name on old maps into a sprawling modern conspiracy theory is, honestly, a relatively recent phenomenon. Its origins really can't be traced to a single source, but rather to a kind of confluence of ideas circulating in niche communities. The groundwork was laid by earlier forms of alternative history and esoteric thought. For example, the writings of figures like Helena Blavatsky in the 19th century popularized the concept of lost, advanced civilizations such as Atlantis and Lemuria. This, in turn, created a cultural appetite for narratives that challenged mainstream historical accounts, suggesting that a grand, hidden past had been concealed from humanity by powerful forces. These ideas simmered for decades in esoteric and fringe circles. However, the specific focus on Tartaria seems to have gained traction in Russia in the early 2000s. The work of Nikolai Levashov, a Russian occultist and author, was particularly influential. He promoted a vision of a vast Slavic Aryan empire, which he connected to the term Tartaria. He claimed this was the true, glorious history of the Russian people, a history that had been suppressed and distorted by hostile powers. This narrative resonated with certain nationalist sentiments in a post-Soviet Russia that was searching for a new identity, blending historical revisionism with national pride. From Russia, these ideas began to seep into the English-speaking world via the internet. They found fertile ground among pre-existing online communities dedicated to conspiracy theories, from flat earth believers to those who questioned the official accounts of historical events. The visual evidence, actually, was key to this transition. Old maps showing the vast expanse of Tartaria were shared online, presented not as evidence of outdated geography, but as proof of a forgotten superstate. The name itself, mysterious and evocative, was perfect for this kind of speculative reinvention. It was a blank canvas onto which a whole new, elaborate mythology could be painted for a global audience. The modern theory of the Tartarian Empire, as we know it today, truly coalesced in the mid-2010s on platforms like YouTube, Reddit, and various online forums. It absorbed elements from many other fringe beliefs, creating a kind of grand, unified conspiracy theory. It combined the idea of a lost civilization with theories about giants, advanced ancient technology, and a global cover-up. This new syncretic myth was far grander than its Russian origins, proposing not just a Slavic empire, but a peaceful worldwide civilization that was destroyed and erased from history. This, really, marked the birth of Tartaria as a full-blown Internet-age phenomenon. At the heart of the Tartarian Empire theory is the belief that a magnificent global civilization once existed, far more advanced and benevolent than our own. Proponents argue that this civilization, known as Tartaria, was responsible for constructing most of the world's grandest architecture. They point to ornate, classical-style buildings found across the globe, from Paris and London to Chicago and Melbourne. These structures, called Old World architecture, display craftsmanship that modern builders cannot replicate. This architectural uniformity, they argue, is evidence of a single, unified global culture. According to the theory, this empire was not confined to Asia. Instead, Great Tartary was the seat of a worldwide government that presided over interconnected city-states. This civilization was characterized by peace, prosperity, and harmony. It had mastered incredible technologies, including methods for generating clean, free energy. This energy was harnessed through intricate spires, domes, and antennas atop old-world buildings, seen as functional parts of a forgotten energy grid. A central claim is that this civilization has been deliberately erased from history. The current powers that be overthrew the Tartarian Empire in the recent past, sometime in the 19th or early 20th century. They then initiated a campaign to rewrite the past. Historical records were destroyed, books were burned, and a false timeline was taught in schools. Tartarian buildings that couldn't be destroyed were repurposed, their true origins obscured. This alleged cover-up explains the lack of direct evidence. Any absence of Tartarian artifacts, texts, or remains is seen as proof of how successful the conspiracy has been. Believers see themselves as historical detectives, piecing together truth from missed clues, the old maps, orphan buildings with no construction records, and anomalies in old photographs. The narrative is self-sealing, with any lack of evidence reinforcing the belief in a cover-up. The Tartarian myth includes fantastic elements. One prominent concept is the mud flood, explaining the destruction of the Tartarian civilization. Allegedly, a deluge buried cities, explaining ground-level doors leading into pavement. Another element is that Tartarians were giants. Massive doorways and high ceilings suggest construction for beings larger than modern humans. Free energy is also central, with Tartarians drawing limitless energy from the universe. Metal spires are reimagined as components of this energy system. These elements add spectacle and mystery. They create a fictional world offering an alternative to mainstream history. The story of the Tartarian Empire is, honestly, inextricably linked to the rise of the internet and social media. It's a conspiracy theory that was born online and has spread almost exclusively through digital channels. Platforms like YouTube, Reddit, Facebook, and TikTok have been the primary vehicles for its dissemination, allowing the theory to reach a global audience with remarkable speed. Unlike traditional historical research, which relies on peer-reviewed journals and academic books, the Tartarian narrative is built through a decentralized network of amateur researchers, content creators, and online communities. This digital ecosystem has been the perfect incubator for the myth. Video sharing platforms have been particularly influential. Content creators produce long, documentary-style videos that present a compelling, if deeply flawed, case for the existence of Tartaria. They use a technique of visual persuasion, showing a rapid succession of images, old maps, architectural photos, vintage illustrations, set to dramatic music and accompanied by confident narration. For a casual viewer, this can be very convincing. It creates the impression of a wealth of evidence, even though the interpretation is based on speculation and a rejection of conventional historical knowledge. The visual nature makes it more accessible and emotionally resonant than a dry academic text. Online forums and social media groups, such as the Tartarian Empire subreddit, function as community hubs where believers gather to share their findings and reinforce their shared beliefs. These spaces create an echo chamber effect. Within these digital walls, the theory is treated as established fact, and dissenting voices are often dismissed or censored. This insular environment protects the narrative from scrutiny and fosters a strong sense of community among adherents. They see themselves as brave truth-seekers collaborating to uncover a history the establishment wants hidden. The algorithms that govern these platforms also play a significant role. These systems keep users engaged by showing them similar content to what they've watched. If a user shows interest in one conspiracy theory video, the algorithm recommends more, including those about Tartaria. This can lead individuals down a rabbit hole, gradually exposing them to more extreme fringe ideas. The very architecture of the modern internet has helped build and sustain the fictional empire of Tartaria, turning it from a niche curiosity into a widespread cultural phenomenon. The Tartarian Empire myth resonates with many due to deep, complex reasons. A primary driver is distrust of institutions and mainstream knowledge. The theory offers a radical alternative, a hidden history. The myth provides wonder in a world that feels mundane. It's an epic tale filled with giants and magnificent architecture. It presents a battle between the peaceful Tartarians versus the evil elite who destroyed them, offering a comforting, simple explanation. The theory validates admiration for older buildings, suggesting a stolen utopian past. This combination of distrust, wonder, simple answers, and aesthetic yearning explains its appeal. The disappearance of Tartaria from maps was a slow process, a fading of ink over a century. The name, prominent on European maps of Asia for hundreds of years, began to lose prominence during the 18th century. By the mid-19th century, the term became a historical curiosity as more precise information became available. The lands once known as Tartaria were now filled with specific provinces of the Russian and Chinese empires. The disappearance can be seen as a victory for empirical knowledge. It simply faded away as the light of knowledge grew brighter. One of the primary reasons for Tartaria's disappearance from maps was the relentless expansion of two colossal land empires, the Russian Empire from the west and the Qing Empire from the east. Throughout the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, these two powers systematically explored, conquered, and colonized the vast territories that Europeans had once vaguely labeled as Tartaria. As their armies and administrators moved in, they brought with them their own names, their own borders, and their own systems of government. The old, fluid world of nomadic khanates and tribal confederations was gradually replaced by the rigid structures of imperial control, which demanded precise maps for taxation and military purposes. The Russian expansion into Siberia was a particularly powerful force in this process. Beginning in the late 16th century, Cossack adventurers, fur trappers, and government agents pushed steadily eastward, overcoming local resistance and establishing a network of forts and settlements. They charted the great Siberian rivers, catalogued the region's natural resources, and brought its many indigenous peoples under the rule of the Tsar. As this happened, the term Russian Tartary slowly transformed into the more definitive name Siberia, a vast but integral part of the Russian Empire. The maps had to change to reflect this new political reality. A vague term was no longer adequate. From the east, the Manchu-led Qing dynasty of China was consolidating its own vast inner frontier. The Manchus themselves hailed from the region that Europeans had called Chinese Tartary. After conquering China proper in the 17th century, they spent the next 2 centuries securing their dominion over Mongolia, Tibet, and the vast western region they named Xinjiang, meaning New Frontier. They conducted their own extensive mapping projects to administer these huge, diverse territories. European mapmakers, gaining access to this Chinese geographical knowledge through Jesuit missionaries at the imperial court, began to adopt these more accurate and specific designations on their own maps. In the middle, the region once known as Independent Tartary, the Khanates of Central Asia, held out the longest. For a time, these states, such as Bukhara-Khiva and Kokand, maintained their sovereignty. However, during the 19th century, they became the focus of the Great Game, a strategic rivalry between the expanding Russian and British empires. By the late 1800s, Russia had conquered most of the region, incorporating it into its empire under the name of Russian Turkestan. With this final piece of the puzzle falling into place, the old label of Tartaria lost its last geographical anchor. The rise of modern empires had carved up the entire continent, leaving no room for a phantom kingdom. As empires expanded, map-making underwent a revolution. Cartography shifted from guesswork to a precise science, thanks to innovations like the chronometer for accurate longitude. Scientific expeditions, such as Captain Cook's voyages and the Great Trigonometrical Survey of India, gathered reliable data, making old, myth-filled maps obsolete. Maps became essential tools for governments and militaries, demanding accuracy and detail, no room for vague terms like Tartaria. Decorative flourishes gave way to scale bars and longitude grids. Maps now catalogued the world with precision. The disappearance of Tartaria was not a conspiracy, but a casualty of the scientific revolution and the rise of empirical geography. The world was being measured and rationalized. Mystery gave way to data. In this new era, Tartaria became an anachronism, discarded like the flat Earth, as science triumphed. Tartarian conspiracy theorists claim the name's disappearance was a deliberate erasure by a secret elite. But history shows a simpler truth. As knowledge improved, maps became clearer, and vague labels like Tartaria faded naturally. The idea of a vast, coordinated cover-up across nations and centuries is implausible. Instead, thousands of cartographers and explorers simply updated maps with better information. The fading of Tartaria reflects progress, not a plot. It marks the shift from speculation to empirical geography. The name vanished because it was replaced by more accurate, useful knowledge, not because it was suppressed. Though Tartaria vanished from official maps, its legacy lingered in language and culture. The term Tatar survived, as did names like the Strait of Tartary and foods like steak tartare, remnants of old European ideas. Its obscurity made it mysterious, ripe for digital rediscovery in the Internet age. Online, Tartaria became a symbol for lost knowledge and suppressed history, a blank canvas for new myths. For some, it represents a stolen golden age. For others, it's a straightforward case of maps becoming more accurate. Thus, Tartaria lives on a ghost in the digital machine, fueling imagination long after its cartographic demise. The story splits progress for historians, mystery for conspiracy theorists. In academia, Tartaria is no mystery. Historians agree it was a European label for unknown Asian lands, not a real empire. Decades of research in multiple languages reveal a mosaic of cultures and empires. None called themselves Tartarian. Archaeology supports this. No unique Tartarian artifacts or cities have ever been found. The evidence points to diverse peoples, not a lost pan-continental civilization. The real question is why Europeans used the name so long, not where the empire was. Maps reflect the knowledge and imagination of their makers, not hidden realities. The consensus is clear. Tartaria was a European idea, not an Asian reality. Academics dismantle Tartarian theories by explaining the real origins of the evidence. Grand architecture worldwide reflects the spread of European styles, not a lost empire. Mud flood buildings result from cities raising street levels over time, not cataclysmic events. Supposed free energy was a misunderstood scientific idea, not suppressed technology. Old maps show evolving knowledge, not proof of erasure. Each claim is a misinterpretation of history and science. The Tartarian theory collapses under scrutiny, built on myth, not fact. Why does Tartaria captivate so many? Sociologists see it as a response to distrust in institutions and a hunger for simple, dramatic narratives. Cognitive biases and social media echo chambers reinforce belief, creating communities of truth seekers. The myth offers a romanticized, utopian past, an invented memory that critiques the present. For historians, Tartaria's appeal reveals how history is constructed and contested in the digital age. It's a case study in the challenges of communicating real history amid misinformation. Tartaria matters not for its truth, but for what it says about our need for meaning and belonging. History remains a living battleground of ideas, shaping how we see ourselves and our world. In our journey through the story of Tartaria, we've seen it evolve from a vague name on medieval maps to a phantom empire born of European ignorance and fear. Fed by tales like Marco Polo's, it morphed into a sophisticated civilization entwined with the memory of Genghis Khan. Though erased from official maps, the idea of Tartaria hibernated, recently revived as a grand conspiracy theory in our modern digital age. It's now a myth of a lost civilization, offering an alternative worldview more compelling than academic history for many. The echo of this phantom empire continues to reverberate, forcing us to confront history versus wishful thinking. The tale of Tartaria offers profound lessons about the nature of history itself. By understanding why Europeans invented the term Tartaria, we learn more about their worldview than any real Asian empire. The myth has gained traction partly because the real histories of Central Asia and Siberia are so little known in the West. This vacuum of knowledge creates a space where speculative theories can flourish. The persistence of the Tartaria myth demonstrates a deep human need to find meaning in the past. While the Tartarian Empire itself is fiction, its story points towards countless forgotten narratives waiting to be uncovered. In conclusion, the story of Tartaria is a cautionary tale for our digital age. It invites us to be more critical consumers of information and to seek out the real forgotten histories of the world. By exploring the true stories of the peoples who lived on the lands once labeled Tartaria, we can replace a phantom empire with a vibrant human reality.